President Grimson, esteemed guests today. It's a real honor to be here for the 6th gathering of the Arctic Circle Secretariat Assembly here in Reykjavík, and to have seen the expansion of the influence of the Arctic Circle throughout the world and the development of the forums around the world, where people can come together in an environment where everybody can speak on a level playing field. And I'm struck since that first meeting here 5 years ago, one of the things that my job requires of me is that I must predict the future. And so if you want to know the answer to the future, please stop by and I'll predict for you. But when I say I have to predict the future, one of the key things in my job is to identify trends. And not only to identify trends, but to identify the pace at which things are changing. And when I looked at the Arctic a number of years ago and I saw the data, and one piece of data that we're all familiar with is how quickly the ice sheet is retreating. One of the things that I could see was that I really thought, though I was not a climatologist, that people were underestimating the pace at which things were happening. And one of the reasons for that is just that there, in the data, appeared to be acceleration occurring. And to stand here today and think about 5 years ago when I stood here and to talk about some of the things like the Northern Sea Route and the Northwest Passage and shipping and all the things that were potentially coming, I believe people thought this was something far in the distance. But yet, as we heard today, just last month, a container ship for the first time passed through the Northern Sea Route. In 1963, Eleanor Roosevelt wrote a book called Tomorrow is Now. And if you know anything of Eleanor Roosevelt, she was an important part of the vision for the post-war order, including the founding of the United Nations. And she had an impeccable way of looking into the future and seeing what was going to happen and the importance of people to get together and to work for that end. And as we stand here today, or I stand here, you get to sit, tomorrow is now. Things are happening in the Arctic at a much faster pace than we thought. I read a study recently that says that by 2030, that we will have an Arctic free of ice in the summer. Now, that is the most aggressive projection that I've seen, but to be honest, I can't rule it out. And to think that as we stand here, or I stand here today and look into the future and say that within 12 years, we potentially will have no ice in the Arctic in the summer is incomprehensible. And it's incomprehensible mostly from the standpoint that we're not prepared. The challenges that lie in front of us are much greater than the resources which are being applied. And that's happening in all arenas. It's happening in the area of government, and it's happening in the area of business and commerce. And so people say to me, Scott, why have you been interested in the Arctic? And the reason that I'm interested in the Arctic was that I saw a potential huge opportunity for capital to be invested in the Arctic. Our own estimates show that there will be over $1 trillion needed to build the infrastructure of the Arctic. And that not only includes transportation, but communication, energy, and other important things which will be necessary to support the activity in the Arctic. But as I stand here today, I feel that we aren't prepared. We haven't even asked ourselves the basic questions about what we're going to do and how we're going to deal with the issues. For instance, black carbon. 15 ships operating in the world today, I'm talking about large cargo ships, produce more sulfur and nitrogen oxides than all the automobiles in use. If we are going to open the Arctic to shipping and transport, then we must also be prepared to deal with the environment in a responsible way, to deal with the impact that it is going to have on those people that live in the Arctic, not only from the standpoint of dealing with changing the very environment in which they live, but how they are going to participate in the decision-making and the economic prosperity that will come as a result. But as I stand here today, how many of us have contemplated the idea that we will have to build ships that have zero emission? Now you could say to me, Scott, zero emission. I mean, I'm sure Gilfie's like, hey, wait a minute, we're not ready for that, right? Well, Japan is currently working on the development of a hydrogen-powered ship that can take resources from Australia to Japan. Tomorrow is now. We have to start looking at these issues today. And just as here in this forum, a number of years ago, we had an open discussion about the Arctic Investment Protocol, which has been formally endorsed by the Arctic Economic Council as the 6 guiding principles for economic development in the Arctic. That work that was done then, which has provided a foundation to give clear guidance about economic development in the Arctic, now we have to start working on other things. We need a grand plan for transport in the Arctic. As I'm standing here today, I can see Governor Mead Treadwell from Alaska down here, who has been a great advocate for coming up with a plan for Arctic shipping. We need a plan to build infrastructure throughout the Arctic to handle the traffic which is inevitably coming. And this is important both on an economic and commercial, or on an economic and environmental basis, because if we don't have the proper infrastructure in place, we're going to leave the Arctic wide open to the hazards that come along with commercial activity. But for the political people in the room, it is opening up a huge geopolitical question. And the leadership of the great nations of the world, whether that be Russia or Canada or the United States that sit here in the Arctic, or Norway, I don't want to say, and Iceland, right? But these nations need to build their plan and prepare. And we, here at the Arctic Circle, I believe, have the challenge to become the forum and the gathering place where we can start discussing these very serious and immediate questions. Because the pace of change in the Arctic is coming quickly. The demands that are going to come to build infrastructure for navigation, roads, all sorts of things that will be necessary to support ports and other things. We are going to face this issue a lot more quickly than we think. And so I welcome the next 5 years here at the Arctic Circle, because I've seen so much that has come since we began this venture. But I challenge everybody here today to think about what your role is and how we can work together, just as we worked on other projects such as the Arctic Investment Protocol, so that we can identify and build a plan that will take us to the future, because the future is now. Thank you.